This is Conor Lennon from UN News. Now, we often say at the UN that small island developing states are frontline states when it comes to the climate emergency. Now, what that means is that they're particularly vulnerable to the consequences of this climate crisis. Things like rising sea levels, heavy rains which cause flooding, or rising ocean temperatures, acidification which is affecting coral reefs, fishing, and increasingly frequent hurricanes which destroy homes and livelihoods. At the same time, these countries often don't have the means to help their citizens to cope with the problems. Fragile economies mean high unemployment, and these are common issues across all of these small island developing states. Now, this all adds up to a pretty difficult outlook, and that's why many young people are deciding they want and need urgent changes to ensure that they have a world worth living in. So around the world, they're leading strikes, protests, demonstrations, and many of them are gaining the skills at school, at university, that they'll need to find the solutions to combat the crisis. So with that in mind, I've come to a coffee shop in Port of Spain, the capital of Trinidad and Tobago, which is one of those small island developing states just off the coast of Venezuela, to speak to some of the country's leading young voices on climate, to find out what they think about the climate emergency and what they think we need to do about it. And I'll start with Priyanka Lalla, a UNICEF Youth Advocate for the Eastern Caribbean, and you've represented Trinidad and Tobago at the COP26 Climate Change Conference in Glasgow. I was there. It was very cold, much colder than it is here. You've also worked with UNDP and UNEP, other parts of the United Nations, several climate organizations. You've been described as Greta Thunberg of Trinidad and Tobago. You happy with that? You'll take it.
I'll take it.
Worse things to be called, I suppose. And you write children's books. You've written a few children's books as far as ocean adventures, as far as mangrove adventures. You don't have copies with you, do you, by any chance? You don't? Okay. But I think that UNICEF has distributed them as well. So tell us a bit about those books, first of all. How did you get involved in that?
I first started these two books with my little sister Zaafia. It's inspired by her, and she co-authored the books with me. And they are inspired in our mission for climate education. We strongly believe in climate education and its urgency for building more sustainable and equitable communities, especially here in Trinidad and Tobago. And the hope for these books are that they'll be implemented into school curriculums, or they'll be part of the household reading routine, or throughout the Caribbean region. So my work as an advocate started from a very young age, at 10 years old, and I started with zero waste living, with different initiatives like my Eat Green Live Blue campaign, and they have all kind of been embedded into these two books to inspire change and really empower young people to not be daunted or threatened by the climate crisis.
Well, yeah, I mean, it can be quite scary, can't it? I mean,
Yeah.
you said you started at a young age. Did you find it scary when you're thinking about the consequences of everything that's happening?
I think more than finding it scary or daunting, for me it was a passion, because I've, likewise grown up in a beautiful Caribbean region where we have such lush biodiversity, our mangroves, our beaches, our rainforests, and I was inspired after Hurricanes Irma and Maria struck the Leeward Islands.
Right, and that was what, 2017, 2018, and it caused huge problems, like massive, across the Caribbean, in fact, a lot of destruction.
Yeah.
Do you remember that period?
Yes, I do. I remember seeing the destruction, the damage on television, and as you said, more than being scared or being daunted by these threats, I felt empowered that I needed to change the way that I lived in order to help. And I think there's often a narrative that individual action does not create great impact, but it does create great impact. And that is something that I've continued to advocate for in my mission, to advocate for individual action and to empower young people, to show them that we all do have the power.
And next to you, we've got Joshua Prentice. Hi, Joshua. You are a climate and ocean scientist and activist, and you've worked with the United Nations on chemical and waste projects, climate law, geoengineering, governance, climate. That's a lot of stuff. Anything else I've missed out there? Climate adaptation and mitigation. And, well, like Priyanka, you're very keen to engage with young people internationally, and I think you've been at some, well, definitely UN conferences, but a few conferences. And what do you do? Why do you go to these conferences with A lot of blah blah talking, people in suits. I mean, is this somewhere that you feel you can make a difference?
Yeah, definitely. The reason I attend conferences is to take with me the voices of youth internationally and from within my region specifically, to get language included to make sure our voices are heard. Discussions happening now on the national stage will shape our future. Climate change is happening, it is real, and I do believe that youth voices need to be included in all negotiations. So that's why I took a stance to attend conferences to negotiate on youth's behalf as well.
But when you say including language, that would mean that youth voices are included. What does that mean in practice?
Mainly inclusivity for various process. So the secretariats that oversees MEAs and the technical reports, the research they do, we want to have youth included in these processes to have a voice and have young researchers, young activists to engage with them, to ensure that any research they're doing or things they want to see included be added to ensure that it's equitable, it's intergenerational equity to be inclusive to all youth, regardless of age, race, religion, and location in the world.
And last but not least, Zaafia Alexander, climate change activist. You're still in university. You're doing a degree in information systems management at the University of the West Indies here at the campus in Trinidad and Tobago. But you've already started your own. How old are you? 18?
I'm 18, yes.
You've already started your own NGO. How did that happen? Visionary Green Alliance. Tell us about that and what does it do?
We focus on youth advocacy, climate action, awareness, and education. So most of our work focuses on education towards the youths, making climate education more accessible and understandable to youth.
And why did you get involved? What was the passion behind it?
Passion behind it. I had an excruciatingly passionate geography teacher that helped me understand why climate change should be the topic of conversation in Trinidad and Tobago. And I co-founded this organization with two of my friends, Riley and Isabella, and they were equally as passionate as I was and educated on climate change and why it should be a topic in Trinidad and Tobago.
You're all young. Zaafia and Priyanka, you started particularly young. What was it about your background you think that, because I'm sure most people your age, early teens, were not as interested as you were in these topics. What was it you think that got you interested in advocacy and going around the world and talking about these topics?
All right, I'll go first. I was mad. I saw nobody taking any action whatsoever. I saw no one that was my age speaking about this when I knew my classmates was just as educated as I was. I was wondering why youth weren't included in crucial decisions that affected our future.
Absolutely, I think that's very commendable and inspiring. I think for me it was a little bit different. I think for me it kind of stemmed from the values that I was taught in my home environment. I was always taught, to respect the environment, take care of the environment. And when I saw this kind of mentality not matching up with the actions of not only people in Trinidad and Tobago, but region-wide or internationally, I was confused and puzzled as to why do we say certain things but our actions do not match them. And I think that is a narrative that I continue to advocate for, starting in the home environment, educating not only young people but their parents, their guardians, our teachers, our homemakers, and it's a holistic effort towards really adapting to the climate crisis or any issue. It starts at the grassroots level and it's a holistic effort where all partners need to be included, and that is reflected in my advocacy with my children's books, as you mentioned, starting from a young age and getting the whole family unit included into really shaping young minds of future leaders and difference makers who are empowered and inspired to actually want to create change.
Zaafia, you said you were mad, you were angry, but are you surprised, all of you, that there aren't more people your age who are concerned, who are willing to do something? Because I'll be frank here, before we were recording, you all said to me, well, it's kind of disappointing that there aren't more people in Trinidad that are your age that are getting involved in this, because this is something that affects your future. We think things are going to get worse before they get better. So what do you think, Joshua?
Well, when it comes to my age group in particular, there hasn't been much engagement when it comes to climate change or environmental issues. I will say that is a byproduct of it not being pushed more from in the school system growing up, and it kind of trickles down from parents as well. They don't teach you good recycling practices, teach you about climate change. Why should we take care of the environment and the benefits we get from it? So I think it's something from that. Now, because of the internet and social media, our generation, well, my age group in particular, we started to get more involved in it. I mean, but I've always had a passion for the environment, and I think a lot of people in my age group who are involved in the sector have had a passion for the environment. From National Geographic, watching Animal Planet growing up, we want to learn more about these things. So even though there is a large disconnect between environment and youth now in my age group, due to them not caring about it, there are a good amount of them. I will say now that, however, it is changing. There have been a lot of push from the government and the government agencies like NGC to include youth. There have been a lot of youth green projects going on. I'm training from various ministries on climate change and how to mitigate it from a agricultural standpoint and how to adapt to it.
It's interesting because in New York at the UN, we have videos about climate change a lot. And when we're talking about small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago, we're obviously talking about hurricanes. We see the pictures of all the destruction. And I guess the impression I got from New York was that everyone would be talking about this all the time, that you'd see the connection between climate change and the effects, but you're saying that's not necessarily the case.
I would like to say that it's not necessarily their fault, because this is why I would like to say that education and advocacy and awareness is a crucial, biggest aspect of my activism, because they're not aware of the situation, they're not aware of the severity of the climate change crisis or how it directly affects Trinidad and Tobago or small island developing states. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Because as much as I'd like to say, oh yeah, they're willingly choosing to be ignorant, that's not true. It's not a part of the syllabus.
Also piggybacking on her points, right? In Trinidad and Tobago, there have been instances of youth dropping out of school to do agricultural stuff, like farming and planting various crops to sell in the market, the local markets. And they don't understand how climate change itself will affect their crop produce through droughts, flooding, things of that nature. And that all stems from a lack of training and lack of advocacy, because they don't understand the reason behind that. Behind their loss of crops and loss of damage to their property is due to climate change. So they just arbitrarily blame the government or... Yeah.
It's ironic, we're a small island developing state, we're most affected, and they don't understand why that's happening. They see the fluctuating weather patterns, they see sea levels rising, they see increased temperatures, and they don't understand why, and they don't understand that we are the primary source of this happening. So yeah.
Yeah, I think just touching on what both of them said, an example that I always give is that we are constantly hit by flash flooding on an annual basis in Trinidad and Tobago. And the same communities, the same marginalized groups, the same coastal communities are hit every year. But there is a disconnect between this and the climate crisis, because people understand the climate crisis on a scientific level, where we know how it affects the water cycle, we know how it affects precipitation patterns, but there isn't a connection to this and how it's affecting the families and the lived experiences of people. For example, when people's homes are washed out, they lose their belongings, their school books, their school supplies. So the young children are forced out of school because their schools are destroyed, they don't have the resources or the accessibility to build back, infringing on their right to education. They are sometimes forced into child marriages. This is another infringement on their rights. They are sometimes forced to support their families, which is in turn child labor. But these infringements on their human rights, on their child rights, are completely disconnected from the issue of climate change and the environment. And I think, going back to what they said, the solution for this is climate education. And it's a testament to what UNICEF has been doing, I think. They have been working towards supporting our school curriculums and reframing the school curriculums in order to implement that sort of, a more dynamic.
Right, so you're touching on politics there, changing laws, changing legislation, and well, Zaafia, you said you're political, so I'll start with you. Because, your point was that you can't really separate politics from this kind of activism. And Joshua, we said earlier, we were talking about legislation, about how much of it is so out of date. So is this, I know it's complicated, you have to get into the detail. Is this something that you're interested in, the groups that you're in are interested in, getting into detail, pushing for laws to change, lobbying politicians? Is that something that you're interested in doing, and is it something that works?
I can start a bit because I do environmental law and I do environmental law, climate change law. Locally in the country, it's very hard to update a law unless it's on the agenda. Because to my knowledge, in Parliament, there's a set number of bills that go to Parliament every year, and it doesn't change. It's to be predetermined. And because of that, there needs to be immense public outcry or outreach from the public, interest from the public, for a law to just change just like that. However, we have seen laws recently being updated due to public interests, the animal rights laws. Climate laws in particular are somewhat hard to address because the laws don't exist in the country. We have a National Environmental Policy, a NEP, and it's policy. Policy is not law. So right now we don't have technically any direct climate change law. We have policies.
So would you say, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, so would you say that like what we're doing, youth pushing on that, would help?
It definitely would. You definitely reach out to the various ministers that oversee that. Ms. Beckles has been an immense supporter of youth. She would definitely, anytime I ask her about something, she's definitely right there. Okay. And she would definitely take up your thoughts and concerns and bring it to the cabinet.
Please let us know what happens as well once you contact the ministers.
Yes, give me that info.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it is something that can change.
The issue with activists within this country is the fact that it feels like it falls on deaf ears most of the times. Like consistently, consecutively, persistently, passionately, as much as they do it, it's like it goes to.
I think a portion of that comes from not knowing how to get what you want. I will say that.
Like not having an end goal?
No, like who to talk to.
Who to talk to?
Yeah, like, I mean, you could try to reach out to the minister per se, but really hard, unless you write a direct letter to the minister, hard to get a response. There are NGOs in Trinidad that collaborate all the time. Yeah, with the ministry.
Is there concrete evidence of them making significant difference though? Like
locally?
Yeah. So that's my issue. That's my issue. They have all these talks and it's like,
I believe it's happening.
Priyanka, you've been quite quiet. I know that you talk a lot at conferences, you do keynotes, panels. I want to know, are you more on this is falling on deaf ears, it's just a waste of time, or do you feel that this can make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have always supported UNICEF's mission, and I'm not political. I do believe absolutely that young people do have the power and do have the voice and do have the opinions. They do have the information to, have a meaningful contribution. But it all comes down to intergenerational collaboration, and we need the support. Yes, we need the support of our ministries, our policymakers, our governments. We need the support of our young people, our educators, our homemakers, and it's a collective effort. I don't think the responsibility falls on one side or the other. It's a collective effort, and we've been seeing action not only nationally but also regionally and internationally, and I think it does give young people the hope that their voice is not only being heard but it's being implemented into action. Obviously there needs to be more of it because we are seeing those gaps in the policies, we're seeing the gaps in the implementation of action, and I think this comes down to two things: transparency and accountability within our policies, ensuring that we check up, is it actually being meaningfully addressed? Are the policies going towards the people who need it the most? Are they targeting the marginalized communities they say they are going to target? And I think that accountability comes from the voice of the young people. We continue to keep our governments, our policy makers, NGOs and various organizations accountable. So it's definitely a balanced effort, and we can improve, definitely, but I think we also need to acknowledge the good that has been coming out already and really acknowledge it to make people feel empowered and inspired to continue.
Let's turn to the elephant in the room, oil. Now, most small island developing states, they rely on oil. It has to be shipped in. They often don't have the money to I mean, you need a lot of upfront cash for things like solar plants, wind, all of the clean energies that as a planet we want to move towards. You're, I guess, blessed or cursed, I don't know what you want to say, by a lot of oil. You've had a lot of oil in this country, which means that you have more money than a lot of other island developing states. So it brings in money, it powers the country. I'd want to know what you think about that. Do you think that this is something that Trinidad should not be doing, or other countries would say, well, no, developing states should have the right to develop before they move to clean energies? At your age group, your level, what do you think? And who wants to start? I'll start. I'm looking at you, Joshua, because I know you've got more of a technical background. Perhaps.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so from my standpoint of sustainable development, as an advocate for clean energy, I believe that we should stop it. However, I exist in the real world as well, and I do liaise with government officials regularly, and I do understand why Trinidad and Tobago has to stay in the oil industry and is in the oil industry right now. Trinidad and Tobago has had a long history of oil and gas exploration. I do understand that now Trinidad and Tobago is expanding to collaborate with other countries in the region, Suriname, Guyana, and Venezuela as well, to push more oil and gas. The reason for that is because there are still a lot of things that need to be done in the country, and Trinidad and Tobago cannot afford to just leave oil and gas. It's its biggest income maker. There have been steps taken to diversify the country. I've seen that firsthand through private sector developments. There have been grants for exports to push businesses to do more exports and develop businesses locally to ship more things, to get more foreign exchange to that way. But to my knowledge, if I'm mistaken, oil and gas accounts for 80% of all revenue in this country. It can't just disappear like that overnight. That's unheard of. So I do understand why Trinidad is still in the oil and gas sector. However, I do believe because the world is shifting towards more clean and green energy, there needs to be discussions had and projects being implemented to push in that direction as well, whether it be R&D to develop more studies to see if it's possible to implement various clean tech, clean energy process in country. I do believe it should happen. I do really want it to happen. It's just we're kind of hamstrung by being dependent for so long, and the lack of diversification through the past 40, 50 years has really hampered the country.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. I have to acknowledge, Trinidad does rely heavily on our oil and gas industry, our economy, the job opportunities. It is heavily reliant, and it's historically been heavily reliant. But within the next few years, the next few decades, we need to make that transition, because the rest of the world is making that transition. Even though it is taking longer than we'd like it to happen, the reality is that we need to make that transition for our own development, the sake of our people and the sake of our biodiversity.
And looking to the future, there's more for you than there is for me, so you've got a lot of future to look towards. Are you more fearful? Are you hopeful? Project 30 years from now, what kind of a Trinidad do you think you'll be looking at?
Trinidad?
Yeah.
To be honest, I do think more definitely needs to be done as soon as possible, because for one, we have a lot of impacts from climate change going on. We have saltwater intrusion on our coastlines from wave action increasing. This has degraded farmland and has increased the risk of coastal flooding during rainfalls as well, because once the tide comes in and floods these waterways, that's supposed to drain water. It then leads to backflow of water into communities. And that's just from a technical standpoint, but the majority of central Trinidad lies below the water line, the high tide mark. So when the high tide comes in and rainfalls, it's flooding in central Trinidad and Tobago. That's one aspect of it. Additionally, there is a drought as well, and also we need to protect our freshwater resources.
I'm still not sure if you're pessimistic or optimistic.
He's like real. I think he's being realistic.
Realistic, but 2050s, what do you think it's going to be like? Do you think we'll have solved these problems?
Based on what I've seen now, I do not think so. The countries have the technical capability to do so. I would hope so. They would push for products to harness that, but realistically, I am very pessimistic for the future, because there are a lot of issues happening right now and on the horizon that have no response or answer yet from the government.
Yeah.
So.
He basically explained like all the science behind it, and I get it. Like, it's hard to remain positive about this, but I still like to have an optimistic attitude, hopeful, but also a bit of realistic. Yeah.
So you're planning to stay in the country, fight for the country?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Priyanka?
I have to agree with both my colleagues. I think definitely from a perspective now, the reality of the situation is that it is quite daunting because what we're seeing is daunting. But my hope is that for the future of the young people of this country, because we have such talented young people, such intelligent, creative minds, and for the sake of them, we need to make that transition for the future of this country.
I agree. It's not our place to say, oh, it's the end of the thing. Like, to just focus on the negatives, because there's future generations that deserve a future like how we do, like how we did, like how y'all do.
Well,
does that make sense?
It does make sense, but no pressure. But it looks like you're the leading climate voices. A lot of it's going to fall on you, but it's great to hear that you're up for the challenge. Even though, as you say, it is daunting. It's going to be a difficult future, but we wish you all the luck. And don't forget, Zaafia, do let us know when you hear back from the minister.
Yes. Give me that info.
Great. Thank you very much.